Okay, time to start discussing Jurassic Park. This video is going to be about the books. Next couple of videos will be about the films. So, I'd heard of Jurassic Park growing up, and I'd seen bits of the first two movies, but didn't watch them because I was either too scared or too grossed out by a couple of things that they showed. On the specific scenes that came onto the screen. And I did see a whole bunch of like previews for the third one, which was about to come out at one point, so I could figure out the gist of what happened in like 2/3 of the movie, but that was it. But my first proper exposure to the franchise was reading the original book when I was starting high school, I think it was, and that was actually not just my introduction to the franchise, but my introduction to Michael Crichton, and I've read a decent amount of his books, though I need to read more of them. And overall thoughts on the book? Well, it takes a while to have the plot start going, but that's how it is with Michael Crichton in a decent amount of his books. He sets up a lot of things, usually with a lot of scientific stuff that may or may not be true, and then he gradually starts introducing the characters, bringing them together, and then it just goes along. So it's a good product once you've finished it, but it's tough to get into. But the payout, especially this book, totally worth it. I really remember being hooked when I was reading it. I did have to go back a couple of times because I forgot who a few characters were, but by the time I ended it, I'm like, yeah, this character's alive, this one's dead, and it wasn't hard for me to keep track of it. I felt that it was a very well done book, did a great job of showcasing various types of dinosaurs, humorous moments, scary moments, just bits from person to person, you know. And yeah, Crichton did an excellent job with it, except for one thing, which I'm sure you can all guess about. It's the fact that in this book, Ian Malcolm dies, but then in the sequel, he's of course brought alive. But to be fair, the film version of Jurassic Park had Malcolm survive, which is probably one reason why Crichton decided to change that particular issue, because all kinds of people love Jeff Goldblum in all of his roles. Like, I've seen Jeff in way more stuff than I have with Sam Neill, even though Sam Neill is good in everything that I've seen him in, but the character that he plays is closer to the same character, I think, whereas Jeff, he does seem to bring his natural positive energy to a lot of his roles, but it does feel like he's portraying different characters. The Grandmaster in Thor, that feels way more arrogant than the professor he plays in Powder. And then Malcolm is a dick in the first Jurassic Park movie and in the beginning of the second, but you now see that because his character's been through the ringer, he's got a different outlook on things, so much that, well, I think you know what I'm trying to get at. I'm not doing the best job of explaining it. But that's really the only other issue that I have with the original book, the fact that Malcolm dies there and then is brought back in the sequel, which I'm pretty sure is Crichton's only sequel, come to think of it, because the sequel to the Andromeda Strain, I can never remember how to actually say that book's title because I've never read it. I wanted to, but I lost my copy. So sorry about that. But yeah, great book. Then The Lost World. Ignoring the fact that, again, it takes a while for the plot to get going, and the fact that Malcolm is still alive, and they do a horrible job of explaining how that happened, it was a good attempt at trying to recreate everything, because having there be a second island, the failed island or the waste island, it does make sense, because you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. Like, testing the nuclear bombs, they didn't just test all of them in like Southern California or Arizona. They blew up a whole bunch of tiny islands in the Pacific. And Russia, they've did all kinds of things in Siberia. So yeah, it makes sense. And then the bringing back of the evil character Dodgson and the other corporation that also is starting to piece things together, well, you know, it makes sense that they have access to some kind of satellite technology that might have let them know where it is, and since Hammond died, that means that there's a whole bunch of paperwork just being tossed around there. You bribe enough people, yeah, it makes sense that you'd be able to try and figure things. Changing from going from the DNA samples to the egg bit, well, yeah, it's a more riskier thing, which is exactly why all the bad characters end up in trouble, but it's a decent alternative, so you're not using the same concept all over again, and it actually did a nice job of complicating the plot, because now you're like, well, where's Johnson going to be amongst the island, along with correcting what is said in the first novel and the first movie, where the T-Rex vision is based on movement, where Malcolm goes, now they've been misinformed. So it's a nice way to change how that plot device was handled. The new characters in the book, I do like that those characters did more than the characters in the first book, but at the same time, it kind of created the idea that it would make it harder for them to kill off characters, because since the kids in this book are older, they were obviously more capable of doing things than the kids in the first book, and when you start off with fewer people, it does make it harder to kill characters off, because that's what's good about slasher films or kill a monster things. You start with a good amount of characters, so that way you know that some are going to be expendable, but occasionally you get a twist where a major character will die unexpectedly, and one of the more expendable ones could easily end up being one of the last two people, because if you go down to only one, it's gotta be a main character or a supporting character that has gradually gotten a lot more to do, that you think of them as a main character, just that they were introduced later. But the way that this book did things, even though I was concerned about them, in hindsight, it was more clear that you weren't going to be killing people off, and I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more death in there. Not that much more. If you had done, like, literally just one more death, I think that would have done it. Because, like, the paleontologist that we follow for a good amount of the early portion of the book, he does get crippled by the end, if I recall correctly. It's been years since I read it. In fact, I don't even think I have a copy of it anymore. I really need to rectify that. But yeah, I think they could have killed the character off and it would have been okay, because there is no equivalent of it in the movie, although that movie is much more loosely based off the source material. And I do think that it was smart of Crichton to include a mechanism at the end of the book that prevents there from being any more books, because you have Dodgson die, and he's the main person that was trying to get his company rich, you know, so obviously he wasn't the only one to know about the plan, but he was the only one that truly got along in the execution, planning, and all that jazz, so then they'd have to start all over again. But because Isla Nublar is presumably destroyed, they never really make that clear in the book if that happened, and Isla Sonar in this book is doomed to fail because there's too many predators there, and it seems like there's a defective gene or whatever in the dinosaurs, because Malcolm and Sarah, they're both confident that eventually all those dinosaurs are going to die much sooner than you'd expect. I do think that was a smart move on Crichton's part. Very smart move. Right. Okay, so I think that's everything I can say about the novels. Time to talk about the movies.